I still remember the moment that changed everything. A small cafeteria in a public school on the outskirts of Detroit. Everyone was laughing, eating, chatting. Everyone except for two boys in the corner. One was crying silently. The other stood there, fists clenched, facing a much larger kid. Nobody paid attention to them. Nobody except me. And what I saw that day would change not just my life, but an entire community. Before I continue, if stories like this inspire you, subscribe to the channel now so you don't miss the next ones. It was my first week as a substitute teacher at Lincoln Elementary. The school wasn't much to look at. Cracked walls, outdated textbooks, and a playground that had seen better days decades ago. But what struck me most wasn't the building. It was the sharp divide between the kids. Some came in brand new sneakers and perfectly ironed clothes. Others wore the same faded t-shirts day after day. I noticed him immediately on my first day. Marcus Davis, 10 years old, with worn-out shoes that were at least 2 sizes too big, held together by duct tape. But what caught my eye wasn't his clothes. It was how he carried himself. Head always up, shoulders back, a quiet dignity that seemed out of place on such a young boy. While other kids his age were rowdy and carefree, Marcus had an old soul's eyes. Whenever I'd catch his glance, he'd give a small, respectful nod before looking away. Marcus sat next to Ethan, a skinny, nervous kid who barely spoke above a whisper. They were an unlikely pair. Marcus, despite his poverty, exuded confidence, while Ethan, from a middle-class family, seemed perpetually terrified. I didn't understand their friendship at first, but that day in the cafeteria made everything clear. I was on lunch duty, standing by the wall, scanning the room as kids enjoyed their meals. The cafeteria had that unmistakable smell of institutional food, a mix of overcooked vegetables and mysterious meat products. The noise level was deafening, as always, with kids shouting across tables and laughing at inside jokes. That's when I noticed Tyler Wilson approaching Ethan's table. Tyler was the school's unofficial king, a 6th grader whose father was on the school board. He was tall for his age, with expensive clothes and a smirk that never seemed to leave his face. Teachers pretended not to notice how he terrorized other students. His father made generous donations after all. What happened next unfolded so quickly I almost missed it. Tyler casually walked by Ethan's table and with a swift, practiced motion, knocked Ethan's lunch tray to the floor. The plastic tray clattered, spilling milk and food everywhere. The cafeteria fell silent for a moment before erupting in laughter. "Oops," Tyler said with exaggerated innocence. "So clumsy of you, Ethan." I started moving toward them, but before I could take 3 steps, Marcus was on his feet. Remember, this was a poor kid facing the richest, most powerful boy in school. The size difference was almost comical. Tyler towered over Marcus by at least 6 inches. I'll never forget Marcus's face. There was no anger, no fear, just a calm determination that seemed impossibly mature. While Ethan sat frozen, tears welling in his eyes, Marcus stepped between his friend and Tyler. "Pick it up," Marcus said, his voice quiet but unwavering. Tyler's eyebrows shot up in surprise before his face settled into a mocking grin. "What did you say to me, charity case?" The cafeteria had gone completely silent now. Every child, every adult was watching. I quickened my pace, already anticipating the fight that would surely follow. "I said pick it up," Marcus repeated, still calm. That was Ethan's only meal today. Something in the way he said it, the simple truth of it, made my heart sink. I suddenly understood that for some of these children, school lunch wasn't just a meal, it was the meal. Tyler laughed, looking around to make sure he had an audience. "Or what? You'll hit me with your duct-taped shoes?" He shoved Marcus hard enough that the smaller boy stumbled back a step, but Marcus didn't fall, and he didn't back down. "No," he said, "I won't hit you. I'm just asking you to do the right thing." Tyler's face darkened. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by someone like Marcus. He shoved him again, harder this time. "What are you going to do about it, poor boy? Call your daddy?" "Oh wait, you don't have one." I was almost there, ready to intervene, when the cafeteria doors swung open. Principal Stevens walked in, taking in the scene with a quick, practiced eye. I froze, curious to see how he would handle it. Principal Stevens had a reputation for being fair, but strict. "What's happening here?" he asked, his deep voice cutting through the tension. Tyler immediately switched to his well-practiced, innocent face. "Nothing, sir. Just a little accident with Ethan's lunch. Principal Stevens looked at the food splattered on the floor, then at Ethan's tear-stained face, and finally at Marcus standing protectively beside his friend. I held my breath, expecting him to simply order the mess cleaned up and move on, like most adults did when confronted with Tyler's behavior. But something extraordinary happened instead. If this story has touched you so far, leave a like and subscribe to the channel, because there are other real and emotional stories that you can't miss. Principal Stevens walked over to Tyler, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Wilson," he said calmly, "I believe I just witnessed you bullying these boys, is that correct?" Tyler's confident smirk faltered. "No, sir. It was an accident. Don't lie to me, son." Principal Stevens cut him off. "I was watching from the doorway for the last minute." The look of shock on Tyler's face was almost comical. He clearly wasn't used to being called out, especially not by authority figures. "Now," Principal Stevens continued, "you have two choices. You can either clean up this mess, apologize sincerely to both Ethan and Marcus, and join me for lunch detention for the next week, or we can call your father and discuss your behavior with him." Tyler's face paled. "I'll clean it up," he muttered. As Tyler reluctantly began picking up the scattered food, Principal Stevens turned to Marcus. "That was brave, standing up for your friend like that," he said quietly, so only those of us nearby could hear. "But next time, find an adult first. That's what we're here for." Marcus nodded solemnly, but there was a small gleam of vindication in his eyes. For perhaps the first time in his young life, an adult had taken his side against someone like Tyler. What none of us knew then was that this small moment of justice, a poor boy standing up to a rich bully, and an authority figure doing the right thing, would set in motion events that would transform our school and community forever. After lunch, I pulled Principal Stevens aside to thank him for intervening. "Don't thank me," he said with a heavy sigh. "I should have stepped in long ago with Tyler. But did you see that boy, Marcus? 10 years old and more courage than most adults I know." I nodded, thinking about Marcus's unflinching stance. "What's his story?" I asked. "I've only been here a week, but he seems different." Principal Stevens's face softened. "Marcus has had it harder than most," he explained. "Father left when he was 4. Mother works 3 jobs. They were homeless for a while last year, living in their car until a local church helped them get back on their feet." My chest tightened at this revelation. No wonder the boy carried himself with such quiet dignity. He'd already faced more hardships than many people do in a lifetime. "The thing that gets me," Principal Stevens continued, "is that despite everything, Marcus has never missed a day of school, never turned in homework late, and his grades? Top of his class in math and science." I was stunned. I'd noticed Marcus was attentive in class, but I had no idea he was excelling academically despite his circumstances. "And Ethan? The boy whose lunch was knocked over?" Principal Stevens shook his head. "Severe anxiety. Barely spoke to anyone before Marcus befriended him last year. Marcus somehow took him under his wing, and it's been good for both of them. Ethan's family has means, but not much time for him. Both parents are surgeons at Detroit General. The complexity of these young lives hit me hard. Here was Marcus with nothing material to give, but offering friendship and protection to a boy who had everything except emotional support. As days passed, I found myself paying more attention to Marcus. I noticed how he always shared his lunch with Ethan, despite clearly not having enough for himself. How he patiently helped Ethan with reading during library time, even though Marcus could have used that time to read ahead himself. Small acts of kindness that no one had taught him. They simply came naturally. One morning, about 2 weeks after the cafeteria incident, Marcus came to school with a black eye. He tried to hide it, keeping his head down and his hood up, but I noticed immediately. When I gently asked him what happened, he just shrugged, fell off my bike. He mumbled, not meeting my eyes. I didn't push it, but during recess, I overheard some kids talking. Apparently Tyler and some older boys had caught Marcus walking home the previous day. They'd cornered him in retaliation for the cafeteria incident. What struck me wasn't just the injustice of it, but Marcus's response. He hadn't reported it. He hadn't complained. He simply showed up the next day, ready to learn, ready to protect Ethan if needed. That afternoon, I approached Principal Stevens about what I'd heard. "I know," he said grimly. "The Johnson twins saw it happen and told me this morning. I've already called Tyler's parents and the other boys' families. They're all facing suspension. But why didn't Marcus tell anyone? I asked. Principal Stevens looked out the window at the playground, where Marcus sat quietly reading while keeping one eye on Ethan playing nearby. Pride, he said simply, and probably fear that involving adults would make things worse. When you grow up like Marcus has, you learn early that complaining about your problems rarely helps. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Marcus, his quiet strength, his academic potential, his unwavering loyalty to his friend. And I thought about the broken system that puts such heavy burdens on children's shoulders. The next day, I made a decision. I would start an after-school program focusing on STEM subjects: science, technology, engineering, and math. The school had no budget for it, but I had savings and time. I posted flyers around the school, announcing the free program would start the following Monday. To my surprise, 15 students signed up, including Marcus, who was first on the list. What I hadn't expected was Ethan's name right below his, or Tyler's name at the bottom of the sheet, added reluctantly after a stern talk with Principal Stevens about making amends. That first Monday after school, I nervously arranged the classroom with the few supplies I'd purchased myself. Some basic robotics kits, math puzzles, and second-hand laptops I'd convinced my tech-savvy brother to refurbish. I had no idea if this would work or if it would just be another well-intentioned failure in a school that had seen too many. The students filed in hesitantly, Marcus and Ethan taking seats in the front row, Tyler slouching in the back corner, clearly only there because he had to be. I took a deep breath and began. Today, I said, we're going to build bridges. I divided them into teams of 3, deliberately placing Marcus, Ethan, and Tyler in the same group. It was a risk, but my instinct told me it might be the only way to begin healing the rift between them. The task was simple in concept but challenging in execution. Using only popsicle sticks, string, and glue, build a bridge that could support the weight of a textbook. The catch? Each team member had to contribute equally, and they had to document their process like real engineers. What happened next was nothing short of remarkable. At first, Tyler refused to participate, sitting apart with his arms crossed. Marcus and Ethan worked quietly together, with Marcus gently encouraging Ethan's ideas. But when their first design collapsed under the weight of a single eraser, something shifted. Tyler, who had been watching with barely concealed interest, suddenly spoke up. "That's not going to work," he said. "The supports need to be triangular, not square." Marcus looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. "You're right," he said simply. "Want to show us?" It was an olive branch, offered with no fanfare, no conditions. Just one boy recognizing another's insight regardless of their history. Reluctantly at first, then with growing enthusiasm, Tyler joined them. And to everyone's surprise, including my own, their bridge ended up being the strongest in the class, easily supporting not just one textbook but 3. As the other students filed out at the end of the session, I noticed the 3 boys lingering, still discussing improvements they could make to their design. For those 2 hours, they hadn't been the poor kid, the anxious kid, and the bully. They'd just been engineers, working together to solve a problem. It was a small victory, but in that moment, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe bridges could be built between people, not just across physical gaps. Over the next few weeks, the after-school program grew. Word spread that something special was happening in room 103 after the final bell. More students joined, and unexpectedly, a few parents started showing up. First just to pick up their kids, then staying to watch, and finally asking if they could help. One of those parents was Dr. Karen Chen, Ethan's mother. She arrived early one day to find her son enthusiastically explaining a circuit board to Tyler, while Marcus troubleshot a programming issue. "I've never seen him like this," she said quietly, standing next to me as we watched the boys work. "At home, he barely speaks. Here, he's confident." I smiled, watching Ethan's animated gestures as he talked about electrical pathways. "He's found his voice," I said, "and some good friends." Dr. Chen was quiet for a moment. "You know, I have colleagues who could contribute to this program. Equipment, expertise. Would that be helpful?" That casual offer was the beginning of something bigger than any of us had imagined. Dr. Chen not only contributed herself, but rallied other medical professionals and researchers from Detroit General to support our little program. Soon we had proper equipment, mentorship opportunities, and even small scholarships for particularly dedicated students. But the real magic was happening between the students themselves. Tyler, who had never had to work hard for anything in his life, discovered he had a genuine talent for mechanical engineering, but only when he collaborated with others. Ethan found that his anxiety lessened when he was solving complex problems. And Marcus? Marcus flourished in ways that took my breath away. It turned out that beneath his quiet exterior was a natural genius for coding and computational thinking. Given access to proper resources for the first time, his abilities exploded. By the third month, he was creating programs that left even our adult mentors amazed. One evening, after most students had left, I found Marcus still working intently on one of the computers. "Don't you need to get home?" I asked gently. "It's getting late." He looked up, his eyes bright with excitement. "I'm almost finished. Look." On the screen was a simple but elegant app, a homework organization system specifically designed for students who had to work or care for siblings after school. It broke down assignments into manageable chunks that could be completed in small time windows. "I made it for kids like me," he explained, "who don't have hours to sit and do homework all at once." I stared at the screen, then at this remarkable child who, despite having every reason to focus only on his own survival, was thinking about how to help others in similar situations. "Marcus," I said carefully, "this is extraordinary. Have you shown this to anyone else?" He shook his head. "It's not ready yet. I want to add features for kids who don't have internet at home." That night I made some calls, to Dr. Chen, to Principal Stevens, and finally to an old college friend who now worked at a major tech company in Chicago. By morning I had arranged for a small delegation of tech professionals to visit our after-school program the following week. I wasn't prepared for what happened when those tech executives walked into our humble classroom. They'd come as a courtesy to my friend, expecting to spend an hour mentoring underprivileged kids before returning to their busy lives. They left 6 hours later, business cards in Marcus's hand, and minds blown by what they'd discovered. The executives had planned a simple demonstration of coding basics, assuming our students would be beginners. Within minutes, it was clear they'd severely underestimated these kids, especially Marcus. When one executive pulled up a coding problem his team had been struggling with, Marcus quietly raised his hand and offered a solution they hadn't considered. At first, there were polite smiles, adults humoring a child, then confusion as they processed his suggestion. Finally, stunned silence as they realized this 10-year-old boy had just solved a problem that had stumped their department for weeks. "Who taught you to code like this?" the lead developer asked Marcus. Marcus shrugged, that same humble gesture I'd seen so many times. "Nobody, really. I watch videos at the public library when I can, and Mr. Reed gave me books." He nodded toward me, though I'd done nothing but provide basic resources. His talent was entirely his own. The most remarkable moment came when Tyler, yes, the same Tyler who had bullied Marcus weeks earlier, spoke up proudly. "Marcus taught himself everything. He's the smartest kid in school." The genuine admiration in his voice marked a transformation so profound it still gives me goosebumps thinking about it. By the end of that visit, the tech company had pledged to fully fund our after-school program for 3 years, provide internship opportunities for our older students, and, most significantly for Marcus, create a special mentorship program for exceptionally gifted students from underprivileged backgrounds. As word spread about our program and Marcus's extraordinary abilities, something unexpected happened. Other schools began reaching out, asking how they could replicate what we were doing. Local businesses offered sponsorships. The university sent graduate students as volunteer mentors. What had started as one teacher's small attempt to make a difference was becoming a movement. And at the center of it all was a boy in duct-taped shoes who had simply stood up for his friend in a cafeteria. But success never comes without complications. As Marcus gained recognition, I noticed a troubling pattern. He was missing school more frequently. When he did attend, he sometimes looked exhausted, with dark circles under his eyes. His clothes, always worn but clean, sometimes appeared unwashed. After a particularly concerning absence of 3 days, I decided to visit his home. Principal Stevens provided the address and offered to come with me. "I've been meaning to check in on the family anyway," he said, his face creased with worry. Marcus lived in a small apartment complex on the outskirts of town. the kind of place people ended up when they had nowhere else to go. The building's exterior paint was peeling, and several windows were covered with cardboard instead of glass. We climbed 3 flights of stairs with broken railings to reach apartment 3C. Marcus's mother, Shanice Davis, opened the door looking exhausted but immediately straightened when she saw us. She was young, too young it seemed to have a 10-year-old son, but her eyes held the weariness of someone who had lived a much longer life. "Is Marcus in trouble?" were her first words, worry immediately replacing fatigue. "Not at all," Principal Stevens reassured her. "We're just concerned. He's missed several days of school." She invited us in, apologizing for the state of the apartment. It was small but meticulously clean, with furniture that had clearly been salvaged from various sources. I noticed school books carefully arranged on a small table, and on a shelf above, trophies and certificates from our STEM program displayed proudly. "Marcus has been watching his little sister," she explained, gesturing to a sleeping toddler on the couch. "I lost one of my jobs and I couldn't afford daycare while I went to interviews." Her voice held no self-pity, just the matter-of-fact tone of someone used to navigating impossible situations. "He didn't want to miss school," she continued. "That boy loves learning more than anything, but I didn't have anyone else to ask." The reality of Marcus's situation hit me like a physical blow. While we'd been celebrating his genius, his accomplishments, his potential to change the world, he'd been silently shouldering adult responsibilities at home. His occasional absences weren't due to lack of interest or commitment. They were because he was needed as a caretaker, a second parent. Before we left, I asked Shanice a question that had been bothering me since I'd discovered Marcus's talent. "Did you know about his abilities with computers and math?" A small, proud smile crossed her tired face. Since he was tiny, he was figuring out patterns before he could talk properly. By 4, he was doing his cousin's 3rd-grade math homework for fun. Her expression clouded. "But what was I supposed to do with that? Fancy private schools cost money. Special programs need parents who can drive you there, help with projects." She looked down. I could barely keep a roof over our heads. On the drive back to school, Principal Stevens and I were quiet, both processing what we'd seen. "We've been celebrating his talent," I finally said, "but we've been missing half the story. It's not just that Marcus is brilliant despite his circumstances. It's that he's maintained that brilliance, that kindness, that integrity, while carrying burdens no child should have to bear." Principal Stevens nodded slowly. "So what do we do about it?" That question launched the second phase of our journey, one that would transform not just Marcus's life, but our entire approach to education in our community. If this story has touched you so far, leave a like and subscribe to the channel, because there are other real and emotional stories that you can't miss. Within a week, we had assembled a support network for the Davis family. Dr. Chen helped Shanice find a stable job with better hours at the hospital. The parent of another student offered free childcare for Marcus's little sister. Teachers volunteered to tutor Marcus for the material he had missed. But the most surprising help came from an unexpected source. Tyler Wilson's father, who served on the school board and had initially been furious about his son's suspension, had undergone his own transformation after seeing the change in Tyler. The formerly entitled bullying child had become enthusiastic, engaged, and most shockingly humble, qualities Mr. Wilson credited to his friendship with Marcus. "My son talks about this boy constantly," he told me during a parent-teacher conference. "Marcus this, Marcus that. Says he's never met anyone smarter or braver." He shook his head in amazement. "Tyler used to only respect money and power. Now he respects character. That's priceless." 2 weeks later, Mr. Wilson approached me after school. "I've been thinking," he said. "Our district has that old computer lab facility that's been sitting empty since the budget cuts. What if we renovated it as a permanent space for your program? Open it up to students from all the schools in the area?" His offer was the tipping point. With the Wilson family's influence behind us, district resources suddenly became available. The tech company's funding expanded. Other businesses joined in. Within months, what had started as a small after-school activity in a single classroom became the East Side Innovation Center, a state-of-the-art facility open to any student in the district with an interest in STEM. And Marcus? Marcus thrived. With stable support at home and unlimited resources at school, his abilities soared beyond what any of us had imagined possible. By age 12, he was taking advanced placement courses online, By 13, he had created an artificial intelligence program that could translate mathematical concepts into simple language for younger students, a project that won national recognition. But it wasn't just Marcus who was transformed. The center became a place where social barriers dissolved. Rich kids and poor kids worked side by side. Students who had never spoken to each other in school hallways became collaborators and friends. The hierarchies that had seemed so rigid and unchangeable began to crumble. Tyler, once the school's feared bully, became one of the center's most dedicated mentors, particularly skilled at encouraging younger students who lacked confidence. "I know what it's like to be the worst version of yourself," he told me once, "and I know it's possible to change." Ethan, no longer the terrified boy hiding in the cafeteria, discovered a talent for teaching. His ability to break down complex concepts into understandable parts made him invaluable when new students joined the program. 3 years after that day in the cafeteria, I stood at the back of an auditorium, watching Marcus present his latest project at a statewide STEM competition. Gone were the duct-taped shoes and too large clothes. He stood tall in a crisp button-down shirt, donated by a community clothing drive for the center's students, his voice clear and confident as he explained his innovation, a system that could identify areas in the city with inadequate access to essential services. "The goal," he said to the packed audience, "is to make invisible problems visible. When we can see where the gaps are, we can start fixing them." I glanced around the auditorium. In the front row sat Shanice, now a certified medical assistant at Detroit General, beaming with pride. Beside her was Marcus's little sister, now in kindergarten, drawing on a notepad. Behind them were dozens of students from our center, all there to support their friend and role model. Marcus won first place that day, but the trophy seemed almost incidental to him. What mattered was that his project would be implemented by the city as a pilot program. Real change would come from his work. After the ceremony, as crowds dispersed, I found Marcus sitting quietly on a bench outside, looking up at the stars. "Congratulations," I said, sitting beside him. "You've come a long way from that day in the cafeteria." He smiled, the same gentle smile I'd first noticed years ago. "That seems like a lifetime ago. Does it ever surprise you?" I asked. "How much has changed because you stood up for Ethan that day?" He thought for a moment. "I didn't do it to change anything," he said finally. "I just couldn't watch someone be hurt and do nothing. My mom always says that's the one choice we always have, no matter how little money or power we have, whether to be kind or not." His simple wisdom struck me deeply. In a world that often feels overwhelmingly complex with problems too large to solve, this young boy had reminded me of the most fundamental truth. Change begins with small acts of courage and kindness. The following week, I received news that would accelerate our program beyond anything we'd imagined. A major technology foundation had selected the East Side Innovation Center as the recipient of a $2 million grant to expand our model to other underserved communities nationwide. The announcement came with an invitation for me to speak at their annual conference about our approach. I was terrified. I'd never spoken to such a prestigious audience before. But when I expressed my doubts to Marcus, he just shrugged in that way of his and said, "Just tell them the truth. How it all started with one person deciding to do the right thing." So that's what I did. I stood on that stage in front of educators, philanthropists, and technology leaders from across the country and told them about a cafeteria, a knocked-over lunch tray, and a boy in duct-taped shoes who refused to look away from injustice. The most valuable resource in any community, I concluded, isn't money or technology. It's moral courage, and it can come from the most unexpected places, like a child society had written off as just another poor kid with no future. The standing ovation was nice, but what mattered more were the conversations afterward. Dozens of educators and community leaders asking detailed questions about how they could implement similar programs, how they could identify and support their own hidden Marcuses. As our model expanded to other schools and cities, I began to receive letters and emails from teachers across the country sharing similar stories of children whose brilliance had been overshadowed by poverty, whose potential had been nearly lost until someone looked past their circumstances to see their true capabilities. One evening, as I was sorting through these messages in my office, there was a knock at the door. It was Principal Stevens, now Superintendent Stevens, after his innovative work with our program had caught the attention of the school board. "Got a minute?" he asked, settling into the chair across from my desk. For you? Always. He slid a folder across to me. The district's creating a new position, Director of Innovative Learning, full administrative authority to implement programs like ours throughout all our schools. Substantial budget, support staff, the works. He smiled. We want you for the job. I stared at the folder, speechless. After years of fighting for resources, scraping together donations, working nights and weekends to keep our program running, here was official recognition and the power to make permanent systemic change. I don't know what to say, I admitted. Say yes, came a voice from the doorway. Marcus stood there, now 14 years old and nearly unrecognizable from the small, uncertain boy I'd first met. Not just because he'd grown taller, or because he was dressed in normal teenage clothes instead of worn hand-me-downs, but because of the confident way he carried himself, the look of someone who knew his worth in the world. How long have you been eavesdropping? I asked with a smile. Long enough, he grinned. You have to take it. We need people who understand in those positions. Understand what? I asked, although I thought I knew the answer. That talent is everywhere, he said simply. Opportunity isn't. Those words, profound in their simplicity, became the motto of our expanded program. We had them painted on the wall of every innovation center that opened under our guidance. Talent is everywhere. Opportunity isn't. Yet. We added that last word, yet, at Marcus's suggestion. Because we're working on it, he explained, and that makes all the difference. Over the next 2 years, our model spread to 37 schools across 3 states. We documented everything meticulously, the successes, the failures, the adjustments we made for different communities with different needs. We created a playbook that any school could follow, regardless of their resources. The key ingredients were always the same. Identify hidden talent, provide resources and mentorship, break down social barriers, and connect students' work to real community needs. It wasn't about creating artificial environments of excellence for a select few. It was about recognizing that excellence already existed everywhere. It just needed the right conditions to flourish. Throughout this expansion, Marcus remained our North Star, not just for his intellectual gifts, but for his unfailing moral compass. No matter how much recognition he received, and there was plenty, national awards, media attention, college recruiters circling years before he'd graduate, he never lost sight of where he'd come from or the responsibility he felt toward other kids like him. When he was 15, he launched a mentorship program specifically for elementary students from disadvantaged backgrounds, pairing them with high school students who could relate to their struggles. The earlier we reach them, he explained, the less catching up they'll have to do later. Tyler became one of his most dedicated volunteers, working particularly well with angry young boys who reminded him of his former self. I can spot a bully from a mile away, he told me once, because I know exactly what they're hiding. Fear, insecurity, the desperate need to feel powerful when everything else in your life makes you feel powerless. Ethan, meanwhile, had overcome his anxiety enough to become a student representative on the school board, advocating passionately for expanded mental health resources in schools. So many kids are struggling silently, he said during one presentation. Just because you can't see their pain doesn't mean it's not real. The 3 boys, once adversaries, now inseparable friends, represented everything our program aspired to achieve. Not just academic excellence, but personal transformation and commitment to community. But the real test of our work came from an unexpected quarter. During Marcus's junior year of high school, a devastating economic downturn hit our region. The auto plant that employed nearly a third of our community's parents announced massive layoffs. Local businesses struggled, tax revenue plummeted, and inevitably school budgets were slashed. The school board held an emergency meeting to determine which programs would be cut. Despite all our documented success, the innovation centers were on the chopping block, seen by some as extras that could be sacrificed to preserve core functions. The meeting was scheduled for a Tuesday evening in the main high school auditorium. The board expected the usual sparse attendance, a few teachers, some administrators, maybe a handful of particularly involved parents. What they got instead was an auditorium so packed that people stood along the walls and spilled out into the hallway. Students, parents, local business owners, university representatives, all there to defend the program that had transformed their community. One by one, They approached the microphone to tell their stories. Parents whose children had found purpose and direction through our centers. Employers who had hired our graduates and been amazed by their skills and work ethic. Students whose lives had been changed, whose futures had been rewritten. And then Marcus stepped up to the microphone, the entire room falling silent. 6 years ago, he began, I was a poor kid with no prospects and shoes held together with duct tape. Today I've been accepted to MIT on a full scholarship. He paused, looking around the room. But that's not what matters most. What matters is that there are thousands of kids just like I was, in this district and everywhere else. Kids with minds full of ideas and hearts full of determination, who just need someone to notice them, to believe in them, to give them a chance. I held my breath as Marcus continued his speech. The room was silent. You could feel the weight of every word. These innovation centers aren't luxury items, he said, his voice steady but passionate. They're lifelines. When your family can't afford a computer, when your neighborhood isn't safe to play in, when your parents are working multiple jobs just to keep food on the table, a place like this becomes everything. It becomes hope. He looked directly at the board members, his gaze unwavering. I'm asking you to see what I see every day. Kids whose lives are being transformed. Not just the obvious success stories like mine. Every single student who walks through those doors leaves different than they came in. Then he did something unexpected. He stepped away from the microphone and gestured to the back of the room. Tyler and Ethan stood up, followed by dozens of other students. Some I recognized from our original program, others from newer centers across the district. We prepared something to show you exactly what's at stake, Marcus explained as the students filed onto the stage. What followed was a presentation unlike anything I'd ever seen. The students had created a multimedia showcase of their work. Not just impressive coding projects or robotics demonstrations, but real solutions to community problems. Water quality monitors for neighborhoods with contaminated pipes. Solar-powered charging stations for public spaces. Translation apps for the district's growing immigrant population. Accessibility tools for students with disabilities. One by one, they explained their projects. Not in technical jargon, but in human terms. How each innovation was already making a difference. How many more they could help if given the chance to continue. The final presenter was a small girl, barely 7 years old, from one of our newest centers. She timidly approached the microphone, clutching a tablet. Before the center came to my school, she said in a small voice, I didn't think I was smart. The other kids made fun of me because my English isn't good yet. My family came from Syria last year. She took a deep breath. But then Ms. Patel at the center showed me how to make this. She held up her tablet to show an animation she'd created. A simple but poignant story of a bird finding its way to a new nest after a storm destroys its home. I made it to help other kids who feel scared in a new place, she explained. Now 3 schools are using it to help new students. Her chin lifted slightly. I'm not just the refugee kid anymore. I'm a creator. There wasn't a dry eye in the auditorium. Even the most budget-conscious board members were visibly moved. When the board president called for a vote on the proposed cuts, the outcome was unanimous. The innovation centers would remain fully funded, with other, less essential expenses cut instead. As people filed out of the auditorium that night, I noticed Tyler, Marcus, and Ethan standing together near the exit. Tyler had his arm around the shoulders of the little Syrian girl, telling her how brave she'd been. Ethan was earnestly discussing future presentations with some of the other students. And Marcus was watching it all with a quiet smile that spoke volumes. I approached them, feeling an overwhelming sense of pride. You 3 never cease to amaze me, I said. That presentation was incredible. It wasn't just us, Marcus replied. Every kid here contributed something. We just helped organize it. Tyler nodded. Turns out I'm pretty good at public speaking. Who knew? He grinned, not the arrogant smirk of his bullying days, but a genuine expression of joy. And I made sure everyone's presentation was structured clearly, Ethan added. The nervous boy who once couldn't make eye contact was now confidently discussing presentation strategy. As we walked to the parking lot together, I found myself reflecting on the extraordinary journey we'd all taken. From that moment in a school cafeteria to this night of community triumph, it had all started with a simple act of courage. A boy standing up for what was right, even when it would have been easier to look away. If this story has touched you so far, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. because there are other real and emotional stories that you can't miss. The years passed quickly after that. Our program not only survived but thrived, expanding to schools across the country. Marcus graduated as valedictorian and headed to MIT with a full scholarship, where he continued to develop technologies focused on social impact. Tyler, whose natural leadership had blossomed once channeled in positive directions, went to Michigan State to study education policy, and Ethan, once too anxious to speak above a whisper, was accepted to Northwestern's prestigious communications program. I kept in touch with all three boys as they became young men, watching with pride as they forged their paths in the world. But it was during Marcus's senior year of college that I received the phone call that would bring our story full circle. "Mr. Reed?" Marcus's voice sounded excited, breathless even. "I need your advice on something important." I smiled, settling into my office chair. Marcus still called for advice occasionally, though at 22 he was more than capable of making his own decisions. "What's going on?" "I've been offered 2 jobs after graduation," he explained. "One is with a major tech company in Silicon Valley. The salary is, well, it's more money than I ever imagined making, especially for a first job." "That's fantastic," I said, genuinely pleased but not surprised. Marcus's talents had only grown during his time at MIT. "And the second offer?" There was a pause, and when he spoke again, his voice had softened. "The second is to come home. The city wants to expand the Innovation Center model into a full-fledged technical high school for underserved students. They're offering me the position of founding director." My heart swelled with pride. "That's incredible, Marcus." "The salary is less than half of what the tech company is offering," he admitted, "and I'd have to delay my graduate studies." "What does your gut tell you?" He sighed. "My gut says to come home, to build something that could help hundreds of kids like me. But is that the smart choice? After everything everyone's invested in me, shouldn't I aim for the biggest impact?" I thought carefully before answering. "Marcus, do you remember what you told that school board 6 years ago? About what matters most? That there are thousands of kids just like I was," he recited from memory. "Kids with minds full of ideas and hearts full of determination, who just need someone to notice them." "Exactly," I said. "Impact isn't always measured in dollars or global reach. Sometimes the deepest impact comes from being present, from showing up directly in the lives of people who need you." 2 months later, I stood in the back of another auditorium, watching as Marcus addressed the community about his vision for the new technical high school. The audience included familiar faces: Principal, now Superintendent, Stevens, Dr. Chen, Tyler's parents, dozens of students from our original programs, now grown. Shanice Davis sat in the front row, now a registered nurse and community health advocate, beaming with pride at her son. As Marcus outlined his plans, a curriculum that combined rigorous technical education with community service and entrepreneurship, wraparound support services for families, partnerships with local businesses and universities, I noticed something remarkable. The audience wasn't just listening politely. They were leaning forward, nodding, already imagining themselves as part of this vision. After the presentation, as people mingled and discussed next steps, I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned to find Tyler and Ethan both home on break from their respective universities. "What did you think?" Tyler asked, grinning. "Pretty impressive, right?" "Very," I agreed, though I'm not surprised. Marcus has always had a gift for inspiring people. "That's why we're moving back after graduation," Ethan said matter-of-factly. I raised an eyebrow. "Both of you?" Tyler nodded. "I'm going to teach social entrepreneurship at the new school. Ethan's going to run the communications department." He shrugged as if this decision were the most natural thing in the world. "We've been planning it for months. Marcus needs a team he can trust." I was momentarily speechless. These young men had opportunities anywhere in the country, yet they were choosing to return to the community that had shaped them, to give back, to continue the cycle of transformation. "Don't look so shocked," Ethan laughed. "You're the one who taught us that true success isn't what you achieve for yourself, it's what you help others achieve." The new school opened 18 months later. Eastside Technical Academy welcomed its first class of 200 students, selected not based on prior academic achievement but on demonstrated potential, creativity, and determination. The building itself, a renovated factory that had once employed thousands before closing during the economic downturn, stood as a symbol of the community's rebirth. On opening day, I watched students file into the building, many from neighborhoods like the one where Marcus had grown up. Some looked confident, others nervous, all carrying the weight of expectations, their own and others. Marcus greeted each student personally at the door. When a small boy with worn shoes and a too large backpack approached hesitantly, Marcus knelt to meet him at eye level. "I'm scared," I overheard the boy whisper. "Everyone else looks so smart." Marcus smiled gently. "Can I tell you a secret?" he said. "On my first day at a program like this, I was wearing shoes held together with duct tape, and I was sure everyone would laugh at me." He pointed to a display case in the lobby that held a pair of tattered shoes, Marcus's original shoes, preserved as a reminder of where it all began. "Those were mine." The boy's eyes widened. "Really? And now you're the principal?" "Director," Marcus corrected with a laugh. "And yes, you know why? Because it's not about where you start. It's about who believes in you, and whether you're brave enough to believe in yourself." As the boy walked into the building with new confidence in his step, I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was Superintendent Stevens. "Full circle," he said quietly, watching Marcus greet the next student. I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. In the years that followed, Eastside Technical Academy became a national model for educational innovation. Graduation rates approached 100%. College acceptance and job placement were far above national averages. But more importantly, the school became a beacon of hope in a community that had once been defined by what it lacked. Marcus, Tyler, and Ethan, once a poor boy, a bully, and a victim, had transformed not just their own lives but the very fabric of their community. Their unlikely friendship had sparked a movement that continued to grow, to evolve, to touch lives far beyond what any of us had imagined possible. On the 5th anniversary of the school's opening, a special ceremony was held to dedicate a new wing focused on arts and media education. The community turned out in force: alumni, current students, parents, community partners, media. As director, Marcus was expected to give the main address. He approached the podium with the quiet confidence that had become his trademark, surveying the crowd with a warm smile. But instead of beginning his prepared remarks, he motioned to someone in the audience. "Before I talk about our new wing," he said, "I'd like to invite a special guest to join me on stage. The person who made all of this possible, who saw potential where others saw problems, who believed in 3 boys who had every reason to fail." With a start, I realized he was looking at me. Me, just a substitute teacher who had happened to be in a cafeteria on the right day, who had simply done what any decent person would do. As I reluctantly made my way to the stage, feeling self-conscious under the gaze of hundreds, Marcus continued. "Mr. Reed will tell you he was just doing his job," he said, smiling as I joined him at the podium. "That anyone would have done the same. But that's not true. Most people would have seen a cafeteria incident and moved on. Most would have separated the bully and the victim and forgotten about it by the next day." He looked at me directly. "You saw more. You saw possibilities." He turned back to the audience. "That's what we're celebrating today. Not just a new building wing, but a way of seeing the world, of looking past what is to what could be." As Marcus spoke, I gazed out at the sea of faces before us. There was Shanice Davis, now Director of Community Health Initiatives at Detroit General. There were dozens of graduates from our various programs, many now returning as mentors and teachers. There were current students, eyes shining with the same potential I'd first recognized in Marcus all those years ago. And in that moment, I understood something profound about change. It doesn't always come from grand gestures or revolutionary ideas. Often it starts with the smallest of actions, standing up for someone who needs it, believing in someone who doesn't yet believe in themselves, seeing potential where others see only problems. One boy had stood up to a bully in a school cafeteria. That single act of courage had sparked a chain reaction that transformed countless lives, including my own, and it was still rippling outward, touching lives we would never even know about. After the ceremony, as the crowd dispersed to tour the new facilities, I found myself standing with Marcus, Tyler, and Ethan in a quiet corner of the lobby. The 3 former boys, now accomplished men in their late 20s, stood together just as they had that day in the cafeteria, though everything else had changed. "Did you ever imagine it would lead to all this?" I asked them, gesturing to the bustling school around us. Tyler laughed. When Marcus stood up to me that day, no way. I was just mad some poor kid had the nerve to challenge me. I was just trying not to wet my pants, Ethan admitted with a self-deprecating smile. I never thought I'd speak in public, let alone teach others to do it. Marcus was quiet for a moment, thoughtful. I wasn't thinking about consequences, he finally said. I just knew I couldn't watch Ethan be humiliated and do nothing. It wasn't a calculation. It was an instinct. He looked at me. But someone once told me that character is what you do when no one important is watching. I didn't know the principal was about to walk in. I didn't know you were paying attention. I was just trying to do the right thing in that moment. And that, I said, is exactly why all of this happened. Not because of programs or funding or even education. Those are just tools. This happened because of who you are, all three of you. Because when it mattered, you chose courage over comfort, kindness over cruelty, action over apathy. As we stood together, a group of first-year students walked by, glancing at us with curious respect. They knew the story. It was part of the school's founding legend now, but they couldn't possibly understand how ordinary that moment in the cafeteria had been, how easily it could have gone unnoticed, how many similar moments happen every day in schools across the world. That's the thing about moments of courage. They rarely announce themselves as turning points. They slip in disguised as small decisions, to stand up or stay seated, to speak or remain silent, to act or look away. It's only in retrospect that we see how those tiny choices can alter the course of lives. If there's one thing I've learned from Marcus, from this entire journey, it's this: never underestimate the power of a single act of courage. In a world that can seem overwhelming in its complexity and its problems, remember that change begins with individual choices. One person deciding to do the right thing can create ripples that become waves. That poor boy facing a bully who destroyed his friend's lunch? He didn't just change his own life that day. He didn't just change his friend's life, or even his bully's. He started a movement that continues to grow, to evolve, to transform lives in ways we're still discovering. And it all began with a single moment of courage in a school cafeteria. If this story touched you, subscribe to the channel and comment below which part moved you the most. And before you go, there's a recommended video right here that will give you chills. Watch it now. Have you ever stood up for someone when it was difficult? What gave you the courage to do so?